Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
This is Defense News Weekly. It's been a while since our last edition, and clearly some things have changed. But we've got a lot to cover in this episode, so let's dive in. In this edition, we look at a fundamental change to weaponry that could alter the nature of Army combat. We'll hear the latest on the new pick for Secretary of Defense and how the Pentagon has made it easier for its personnel to work from home. Plus, we'll find out how many billions of dollars the U.S. made from weapons sales this year and take a look back at the biggest military and defense stories of 2020. It's our year-end episode with the latest news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon. This is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. First up, a look at some of your military headlines. Army General Lloyd Austin is poised to become the first Black Secretary of Defense, following his nomination by President-elect Joe Biden. Austin is a former head of U.S. Central Command, but his nomination faces some pushback from Congress. The first doses of the COVID-19 vaccine are rolling out to troops and DoD personnel. Following a recent FDA approval, the vaccine is headed first to healthcare workers and other essential staff, but it won't be made mandatory for all troops for now. And memorial services are being planned for legendary military test pilot Chuck Yeager. The first man to break the sound barrier died December 7th and will be memorialized January 15th in Charleston, West Virginia. The ceremony will be live streamed. And in our top story this week, the Army considers a change to one of the foundational elements of any fight, the standard ammunition round. But even a small alteration would have widespread impacts on everything from weapons to unit tactics. Army Times ground combat reporter Todd South looks at how just a millimeter change would have sweeping ramifications for the Army.
Currently across the Army and the Marine Corps, anyone carrying a rifle or carbine is basically firing the 5.56 millimeter round, been around since Vietnam, or a medium machine gun with a 7.62 millimeter round, which has been around in some form or another since World War I. But the question is whether or not the 5.56 round was the right round to carry into combat. It's really been controversial and debated ever since the round came out and pretty much to this current day. It's a lightweight caliber round. It was made to reduce recoil, increase the number of rounds that Marines and soldiers could carry. It was developed actually as a varmint round to shoot certain types of animals by Remington, and then adapted into military use for those reasons I mentioned before: lower recoil, higher capacity magazines. Now, the current round coming into play, the 6.8 millimeter round, actually traces roots way back into the early 20th century. Japanese troops carried a similar version called a 6.5 millimeter that was abandoned later on when they lost World War II pretty much. And then the 30 caliber rounds of 30-06, 308, which is a 7.62, carried forward in U.S. troops World War II, Korea, and into Vietnam. But along that way, even the British, when they were debating whether or not to adopt a common caliber across allied nations, wanted to go with a .280, which is basically 6.8 millimeter, all the way back in World War II. That was shot down, of course, no pun intended, by the U.S., who wanted to stick with their 30 caliber and then shifted to the 5.56. Now, in the last decade plus, studies coming out of Afghanistan showing limited ranges, limited lethality, and concerns on troops at the front lines with the 5.56 shooting in certain scenarios, basically brought a revisit to the 6 millimeter or intermediate caliber range, which has resulted in the developments we're seeing now.
Major General Bob Scales, former commandant of the Army War College, but more to the point of this interview, I've spent the last 3 decades being an advocate for the close combat function among the ground services. Yeah, in Vietnam, I was a battery commander of the direct support battery during Hamburger Hill. And as a consequence, I got attacked 3 times and overrun once by the NVA, and I realized that while we may have been good at artillery fire, we weren't very good at self-defense. And that's what really led me down this path of wondering why the world's most technologically advanced military in the world was not very good at close combat or close defense or all the things that I failed at as a junior officer. One of the things I've learned in reforming small arms is that it's really all about the bullet. Energy is equal to mass times velocity. And you can increase velocity up to a certain point. But at the end of the day, it's the mass of the bullet that counts. And the beauty of the intermediate round is that it allows a bullet to fly supersonic for much longer periods, say from 300 meters for the 5.56 to 600 meters for the 6.8 millimeter. And as long as the bullet is supersonic, it's stable and it's very accurate. And it has the killing power, the punch, to be able to punch through, say, the enemy's body armor or his light defenses.
So by adopting the 6.8 millimeter round, it's not as simple as just swapping that round into existing weapons. The Army's actually building a whole weapon around the 6.8 millimeter round, the next generation squad weapon.
There are several characteristics that this new weapon has to have that the M16 doesn't have. One, of course, is direct action as opposed to the gas impingement action of the M16, which is inherently unreliable. The other is a suppressor. Think of an infantryman with the ability to have a stealth capability built into his rifle. That's what a suppressor allows. If the enemy can't hear you and you can hear him, that's a tremendous advantage in the close fight.
So the Army has really brought everything down to about 3 contenders for the new next generation squad weapon. And again, they're going to be developing an automatic rifle and a carbine variant, both in 6.8 millimeter. And that is Textron Systems, General Dynamics, and 6 Hour. Now 6 Hour has provided the new handgun in recent years for all of the armed forces, new service sidearm. So they have a traditional kind of design. Textron has a kind of a sci-fi looking design with a whole new kind of case telescope ammunition and little polymer cases. And General Dynamics has a different form factor, somewhat similar to current weapons, but slightly different in terms of how it's going to cycle the round and get rounds down range. So those 3 contenders will be looked at in the next year to 2 years. They'll down select and continue testing, and that will be delivered to the field. What might seem like a small change of just a few millimeters is going to have sweeping changes across formations, tactics, and firepower, all within the next 2 years, and Military Times will be covering those developments closely.
Thanks, Todd. That's it for your military news for this week. When we come back, we'll look at how the Pentagon is handling work-from-home requirements due to COVID, and find out how many billions of dollars in arms sales the U.S. made in 2020.
In this week's Actionable Intelligence, we chat with Andrew Eversden of C4ISRnet about how the United States Department of Defense developed a work-from-home platform for its uniformed and civilian employees. With COVID-19 restrictions, the Defense Information Systems Agency really had to get going and make a platform for service members and DoD employees to work from remotely and securely. Where are they right now, Andrew? What can an employee do at this moment?
So yeah, the Defense Information Systems Agency, which is the Pentagon's combat IT support agency, rolled out this commercial virtual remote environment platform that is a Microsoft Teams environment that allows the warfighter or civilians and military personnel to use collaboration tools to work from home. So that includes file sharing, video, voice, conferencing. It's been used to accommodate that shift from working in the Pentagon or in the office across the globe to working from home.
Andrew, so it seems that a lot of service members and DoD employees are getting used to working at home just as the rest of us are in the civilian world.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, the commercial virtual remote environment has more than 1 million users, and it's been successful, so successful that the DoD Chief Information Officer, Dana Deasy, as well as the Chief Information Officers and other top IT officials at all the services have touted the commercial virtual remote platform as one of their, if not their biggest accomplishment in the pandemic. And that is on top of several other efforts that they had to do to accommodate this telework, including increasing network access or bandwidth, access to virtual private networks to improve cybersecurity or ensure cybersecurity in this new work from home threat environment. So overall, it's been a major accomplishment. Usually projects like this will take maybe a year or two. and they were able to roll this out in a matter of weeks.
The world turned around seemingly in the spring from one day to the next, and it seems that the DoD has hit a stride. What did it take for them to hit this particular stride?
It took a lot of work, and they'll tell you that as well. And this is obviously a crisis of such a magnitude that no one really expected, with sending almost all your employees to work from home. In the early days of the pandemic, the Dana Deasy, the chief information officer, had a telework task force that included the likes of Cyber Command, the service CIOs, DISA, and they were meeting daily for, I think they've said 2 hours a day. They also, DISA specifically, the Defense Information Systems Agency, had to help the USS Mercy and Comfort, the two hospital ships that deployed to Los Angeles and New York City in the early days of the pandemic. They had to help them with expand all their network capacity and make sure that they were ready to operationalize. So I guess there's even things like helping out hospital ships that maybe don't immediately come to mind when you think about COVID-19 response, but that's what they had to do.
Someday soon, hopefully, the pandemic will come to an end, but work from home is a little bit of an option that might be here to stay in the civilian world. Is this something that soldiers and civilians in the DoD might be seeing? What's in the future for them?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and one I think that the DoD and civilian agencies are wrestling with as well. So the commercial virtual remote environment was initially rolled out as a temporary solution. There were always these concerns at the beginning of the pandemic about employees' productivity falling as they work from home, but it's turned out that has not been the case. So they're looking to actually build out a permanent solution to replace CVR that they're hoping will be prepared in June of next year. So right now, the commercial virtual remote platform allows for non-classified work, but for the permanent solution that they are working to come up with and roll out in June of next year, they are hoping to increase cybersecurity on that platform to allow access to more sensitive data. Work is going to change because of this pandemic, for sure. There's no doubt about that.
Andrew, thank you so much for your time. And now for this week's Defense News headlines. The United States and Australia have a partnership to help them train together in a project touted as the first cyber-only arrangement with an allied nation. Participants can log on from anywhere in the world to train together and rehearse missions on the Persistent Cyber Training Environment, or PCTE. This agreement is valued at $215 million over 6 years and provides the flexibility to develop cyber training capabilities for the future. That's according to U.S. Cyber Command. The state and defense departments have announced that the U.S. sold $175 billion in weapons to foreign partners and allies in fiscal year 2020. That's a 2.8% rise from the previous year's total. The total comes at the end of the Trump administration, which made increasing arms exports a key part of its economic growth platform. While industry will cheer the sales total, William Harding of the Center for International Policy warned that the total may be questionable, telling Defense News, quote, "The truth is we do not have reliable figures from the Pentagon or the State Department on how much weaponry the United States delivers each year, and what items have been delivered to what countries. Without this information, it is difficult to fully assess the impact of U.S. arms exports." And also in foreign arms sales, could the United Arab Emirates score an F-35 contract while President Trump is still in office? A top arms sales official says it is. Heidi Grant, the head of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, acknowledged that such a timeline is logistically feasible, but noted it would likely require quick action from the UAE before the current president's administration ends on January 20th. The UAE is seeking a massive $23.37 billion arms package, which includes up to 50 F-35A fighters worth $10.4 billion, 18 MQ-9B drones worth $2.97 billion, and $10 billion worth of air-to-air and air-to-ground munitions. Lawmakers, primarily Democrats, have expressed opposition to the potential sale, saying it ignores risks to sensitive military technology posed by UAE's ties to Russia and China. And there are concerns about the threat of Israel's military edge in the Middle East. The Senate is set to vote this week on legislation to block the sale. Congress wants to rapidly advance a joint program to develop and field a capability for countering drones, requiring the Pentagon to field a system as early as next fall and adding more than $47 million to field the effort, according to the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. Lawmakers would also like the capability, if practical, to be able to go after larger unmanned systems. The Defense Secretary delegated the Army in November 2019 to lead the effort to take a variety of counter-drone systems, many of which were rooted in urgent needs for Middle Eastern conflicts, and consolidate the capabilities into a select group of interim systems. And after the break, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack will give us tips on how to painlessly save in the new year.
On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives her tips on investing strategies for the new year.
With 2021 right around the corner, now is the perfect time to start planning your investment strategy for the year ahead. It's important you know your numbers and your tolerance for risk. COVID-19 has impacted the economy and the market from top to bottom, so it's crucial you know what you and your family's budget can handle. If you can, you should always maximize your contribution to your TSP, 401k, or whatever retirement products you own. If you can't do that this year, do what you can so that you're still adding to your retirement income. Another important factor in investing is time. You're never too young or too old to start. It's simple. The more time you have to invest and earn compound interest, the more money you'll have when it's time to retire. There's no amount too small to start saving, and when it's time to start investing, you can do it with as little as $5. There are online tools and apps that make it easier than ever. So don't let anything hold you back. Remember, when you invest, you're investing in your future. So go ahead and make 2021 the start of something great.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more of our daily coverage, be sure to visit our websites at Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com. For our curated top stories in your inbox every day, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. And to keep up to date with all our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. Also, check out our live events and virtual conferences. Head to DefenseNews.com/events for more information. And when we come back, we'll get a look at the biggest military and defense stories of 2020. 2020 was a momentous year, and no less so for the military. From mounting tensions with Iran, new missions for the Guard and Reserve, to the crisis at Fort Hood. To look back on the biggest stories from the last 12 months, we gathered Military Times' top editors and bureau chiefs to look at the year that was.
Welcome to the Military Times Reporters Roundtable, where each week we'll bring you the analysis from the latest news and headlines around the military and veterans communities. I'm Leo Shane, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Military Times. 2020 had no shortage of headlines for us: a presidential election, a presidential impeachment, and a global pandemic that upended military and civilian lives across America. But amid all that, there were also some pretty big military stories that shouldn't be forgotten as we move into 2021. I've got a panel here today to help highlight some of those stories and discuss why they still matter. With me are Andrew Tillman, our executive editor, Howard Altman, our managing editor, and Megan Myers, our Pentagon Bureau Chief. Good to see all of you here, at least virtually in this new setup. Howard, let's start with you. What's a major military story from the past year that got swept away by some of the other big headlines?
Well, one of the biggest stories all year took place almost a year ago, back in January 3rd, the morning of January 3rd, Baghdad time. Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Commander Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi, the deputy commander of the Popular Mobilization Front, and a Shia umbrella group of Shia militia groups in Iraq, were killed in a U.S. airstrike. That was a controversial move, taking out a foreign military commander. Several days later, on January 8th, the Iranians, as most people expected, retaliated, lobbing about a dozen ballistic missiles at two bases in Iraq housing U.S. military personnel. Initially, President Donald Trump sloughed the injuries off as headaches. Turned out that more than 100 troops had mild traumatic brain injuries. Tensions are continuing in the region. The Nimitz carrier group is in the Persian Gulf right now, ostensibly to cover the drawdown of U.S. troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. But at the end of November, there was an assassination of a key Iranian nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, widely believed to be carried out by the Israelis. Concern, tension remains. The Iranians will likely respond in some way. I talked to some folks at U.S. Central Command. They're mildly optimistic that there won't be a response against U.S. troops. But what the Israelis do remains to be a wild card. Also, don't forget to watch out for that January 3rd anniversary of the killing of Soleimani. Now, one silver lining here is that with the Iranians wanting President-elect Joe Biden to bring the U.S. back to the table on the negotiations for the nuclear arms deal, the Iranians may tamp down whatever kind of response they might be thinking about. So that's one silver lining of that.
Thanks, Howard. Yeah, that feels like that Iranian killing was 5 years ago at this point. So, Andrew, I know you wanted to talk about issues surrounding the Guard and some of the missions they've had this year.
Yeah, I think we really, in some ways, amid all the other stuff going on in 2020, we underappreciated the incredible stream of headlines about Guard and Reserve mobilizations. They, were supporting hurricane relief and wildfires like they have in the past. But this year they were also doing coronavirus response. Just a few weeks ago, they were supporting some of the elections. And the biggest one was this summer. There was a lot of deployments for domestic security in response to the Black Lives Matter protests all across the country. And I think that, for one, that could raise issues about retention in the future. But more importantly, I think that the domestic security issues really raise some pretty big questions about what is the role of the Guard and Reserve here at home and as a part of the broader force. A few years ago, we had a lot of conversations about the role of the Guard and Reserve and whether we wanted to have a strategic reserve like we had during the Cold War that was essentially only going to mobilize if we went to war with Russia. And then after 9/11, we had what we call an operational reserve, where reservists could expect to mobilize very regularly. And now I think heading into 2020, we're going to have some real questions about what is the role of the Guard and Reserve here at home?
It certainly doesn't seem like the Guard missions are going to decrease anytime soon. So, Megan, I know that you wanted to talk about another topic related to Fort Hood and some of the scandals and controversies we saw there.
So this kind of presents as an Army story, but of course, the Army had a junior enlisted soldier go missing at Fort Hood in April. She was female. She had told her family that she'd been suffering some sexual harassment at work, and she didn't think that she could report it because she didn't want to be retaliated against or, in best case scenario, just dismissed. The Army initially went searching for her, and then, as they normally do, they marked her as AWOL when she still couldn't be found. Her family started an online social media campaign saying she didn't go missing, she isn't AWOL, she didn't leave, something happened to her. And after a couple months, the Army was able to retrace its steps and find her body buried a few miles away from Fort Hood. They arrested someone in connection with it. A soldier who was a suspect in the case killed himself when the police confronted him. So that criminal case is ongoing. But this whole issue, the disappearance of Vanessa Guillen, turned into a catalyst for the Army to look at its sexual assault, sexual harassment response and prevention program. And just yesterday, they released the results of an independent investigation that was done at Fort Hood. But anybody who has read the Fort Hood investigation could tell you this could be anywhere in the Army, where there's widespread sexual assault and sexual harassment going on, and even more widespread distrust of the chain of command to handle it if somebody comes forward with it. They briefed that to Congress. In the past few weeks, Congress will have its eye on how they respond to it, but it could signal a little bit of a sea change in the Army. Hopefully it does, for all of the military services, that these programs that they put in place, like the SHARP program, like the SAPR program for the rest of the services, may have the best intentions, but it all matters. The only thing that matters is how commands carry it out and the response that they take when something goes wrong. And it's very clear from this research, and then from all of the feedback from service members who've read it or who have heard about it, that something is wrong here. It's not working. They may have all this stuff in place, but commanders and senior NCOs, people all the way down the chain of command, are not taking it seriously.
Well, look, we'll be watching that. I know the guard issue is going to come up again. We'll be keeping close tabs on that. There's a lot more we could have gotten into today. The Bonham Richard fire, the Afghanistan troop drawdowns, the entire firing of the Theodore Roosevelt's captain, how the ship handled coronavirus problems. But we're going to have to leave it there for now. You can read all about these stories and more on militarytimes.com. And be sure to tune in again right here next week when we'll take a look ahead into 2021 and the major stories our reporters will be tracking in the coming year. Thanks. We'll see you then.
All right, that's all we have time for this week. Join us next on January 3rd when we'll take a look at the year to come. And visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.